I've never been good at talking about myself. Most days I just keep my head down and do the work, chart the vitals, change the dressings, hold a hand when no one else is there. Being a nurse at a small hospital in Asheville means I see everything from broken arms to broken families, and somehow I've made peace with the mess. But no shift ever prepares you for the kind of pain that doesn't bleed. I come home most nights around 2 a.m., the halls quiet, the kitchen dim. That's when I check Nova's room. She's always curled up like her mom used to sleep, one arm under the pillow, a book halfway open. I tuck the blanket around her, turn off the lamp, and whisper, "Good night," even if she won't hear me. I do it for me more than for her. Sienna used to joke that I was born 40 years old. She wasn't wrong. I never chased noise or spotlight. I just wanted a quiet life, one that made sense. Then she walked into it, all fire and sunlight, and nothing ever felt ordinary again. Losing her felt like being hollowed out with a whisper. Nova was only 2 when it happened, too young to remember the exact moment the world broke. But somehow she kept me breathing. I raised her with the same steady rhythm I used in the ER, one task at a time, no room for panic. Feed her, protect her. Try not to cry when she asked why Mommy's voice was only in bedtime stories. And now she's 11, smarter than me, braver than I ever was. Every day I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm honoring Sienna in the way I raise our girl, if the quiet I live in is still love or just the shape grief took when it stayed too long. I grew up on a quiet street lined with red brick homes and trimmed hedges, the kind of place where neighbors wave but never ask real questions. My parents, Gloria and Edgar Hartley, believed in order. Everything had a place, including people. My mother ran the house like a showroom, polished floors and rules that echoed. My father worked at a bank downtown and wore the same steel gray tie every Monday for 30 years. Stability was their gospel. Control was their God. We weren't a warm family. We didn't hug. We nodded. We didn't talk about feelings. We mowed lawns in straight lines. Every Sunday we sat in the same church pew and afterward came home to roast beef and small talk. I used to stare at the ceiling during dinner and wonder if the silence meant something or if it was just all we knew how to give. From an early age I learned how to be invisible. I was the oldest, the dependable one. My brother Marcus, loud and cocky, always found ways to get noticed, good or bad. Diana, the youngest, charmed her way through every room. And me, I kept my head down, got good grades, made my bed, said yes, ma'am. But I was never like them. I didn't care about image, about status, or the right handshake. I liked sitting alone in the garage with a book. I liked quiet over company. My parents didn't understand that. They thought stillness was laziness, sensitivity was weakness. When I said I wanted to be a nurse, my father winced, like I'd told him I wanted to become a magician. "That's not a man's job," he said, as if care had a gender. I didn't argue. I never did. I learned early that nothing bruised them more than being questioned. So I nodded, tucked my ambition deep down, and saved the fight for later, when I'd need it most. Back then, I didn't know how far away home could feel. Not until I brought someone into my life who didn't fit the boxes they'd built. I never wanted to go to that charity gala. The hospital was hosting some fundraiser for pediatric cardiac research, and I'd worked a double shift the day before. I was tired, socially awkward, and allergic to small talk, but my supervisor insisted I show up, said we needed friendly staff faces in the crowd. I planned to stand near the punch table, smile when needed, and leave early. Then I saw her, Sienna Monroe, in a deep green dress that caught the light and held it. She wasn't loud, but people leaned in when she spoke. There was something about the way she carried herself, confident, but warm, like she didn't have anything to prove. I couldn't stop looking, and I hated that I couldn't stop looking. She bumped into me at the drink table, spilling red wine down my white shirt. I froze. She gasped, horrified, and started apologizing while dabbing at my chest with cocktail napkins. "I'm so sorry I was talking with my hands again," she said, laughing at herself. I mumbled that it was fine, just a cheap shirt. She grinned and said, "I'm Sienna, and you are." Somehow that's all it took. One clumsy moment, and I was gone. We talked the rest of the evening about work music books, childhood memories. She told me she worked in communications for a non-profit that helped displaced families. She wrote for people who had no voice, she said. I told her I was a nurse. She said, "That's the most noble thing I've ever heard." No one had ever called my job noble before. I called her 2 days later. Our first date turned into 4 hours of conversation over tea and lemon pie. With Sienna, nothing felt forced. She saw me, really saw me, and didn't flinch. When I introduced her to my parents, the warmth turned to ice. My mother's smile was brittle. My father shook her hand, but his eyes were somewhere else. Later, he pulled me aside and asked if I was serious about this. I said I was. He said, "She's not like us, Gavin." I asked what that meant, but I already knew. I should have walked away from them that day, but I didn't. Not yet. I still thought they'd come around. I still believed blood could learn to make room for love. It was a Thursday, cold and sharp, the kind of air that made your breath visible and your bones ache. Sienna was speaking at a charity event downtown, another one of those causes she believed in with her whole heart. Immigrant families, youth advocacy, literacy access. She never said no when someone asked her to speak. That night she wore a navy coat I'd given her last Christmas and left a lipstick smudge on my coffee mug before heading out. She called at 9:12 p.m. "It's wrapping up soon," she said. "Kiss Nova goodnight for me. I'll be home in an hour." She never made it. By midnight I was pacing. I called. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I drove to the venue, my gut tight. The police lights hit me before I even parked. Someone said attack. Someone else said woman stabbed. I pushed through a crowd, flashing my badge, yelling her name. They led me to an alley where she lay on the concrete, eyes closed, blood pooling beneath her. I knew before the paramedic said it. I knew because I'm a nurse. I've seen that stillness. I've seen that shade of skin when the life has already slipped out. They called it a hate crime. 3 white men had followed her, hurled slurs, then attacked. They were caught. Cameras, eyewitnesses, confessions. Still at the trial, the charges were diluted, the sentences light. One of them smirked at me as he walked out, said, "Didn't mean to kill her, just wanted to scare her." I don't remember the days that followed. Just the funeral, the white flowers she would have hated, and the tiny casket photo of her smile. I went back to work 2 weeks later because bills don't care if you're grieving. I gave meds, I cleaned wounds, I walked sterile halls with a hollow chest. Nova was only 2. She didn't know what we'd lost, but she knew the world felt colder. She started waking up crying, calling out for a mother she barely remembered. I sang to her every night even though I couldn't carry a tune. I whispered stories Sienna used to tell. I held her through my own silence, because I knew I had to become both of us. Nova didn't grow up the way I'd hoped, but she grew anyway. I did my best to keep things steady. Breakfast at 7 Ozu daycare by 8 Ozu night shifts when I could trade them. Our life was built around schedules and survival, but Nova found color in the corners. She asked questions most kids didn't. Why do people die? Why don't stars fall? Why do some people stare at us? I answered what I could, and for the rest, I let her sit on my lap while we figured it out together. She kept one of Sienna's old notebooks tucked under her pillow. I didn't know she'd started writing in it until I found it open on the table one evening. She was 6. I expected scribbles or drawings. Instead, I read 3 pages of a story about a girl who could fly but had to hide her wings. It stopped me cold. From that night on, writing became her world. Every night after dinner, she'd sit at the kitchen table, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth, pencil scratching. I'd read medical journals or fold laundry beside her, pretending not to peek, but I always peeked. By 8, she had filled 5 notebooks. I sent one to a small local publisher along with a clumsy note. "This is my daughter's work. I think it matters." I didn't expect anything back. But 2 months later, they called. The Girl on the Clouds came out the fall. Nova turned 9. It was a slim book softcover with illustrations drawn from her own sketches. It didn't go viral. It didn't win awards. But it made its way into school libraries, and one teacher in Texas emailed me to say her students cried reading it. I cried too. Not because it was a success, but because I saw Sienna in every line. Not just in the strength or imagination, but in the refusal to let pain be the last word. Nova wasn't trying to be her mother. She was becoming someone entirely her own. It came on a Thursday afternoon, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. I hadn't seen that script in nearly 9 years. Inside was a folded card with a printed message: "We're hosting Family's Day dinner. We'd love to see you and Nova. Let's start fresh. Love, Mom and Dad." I read it 3 times before I sat down. They hadn't come to Sienna's funeral, hadn't called after the trial, hadn't asked how Nova was doing. Not a birthday card, not a single visit. Just silence that stretched like a wall too high to scale. And now this dinner. I left the card on the counter for days, unsure if I wanted to throw it out or set it on fire. But Nova saw it. She picked it up, ran her fingers along the edge, and asked, "Are those Grandma and Grandpa? Can I meet them?" She'd never asked before. Maybe she never thought it was an option. I hesitated, unsure what to say. "They want us to come for dinner," I told her. She paused. "Do you want to go? I'm not sure. Do you think they've changed?" I didn't answer. In the end, it was her curiosity that moved me. She wasn't asking for a second chance. She was asking for a beginning. And maybe I owed her the chance to see for herself the truth I had been carrying alone all these years. So I told her, "Okay, we'll go." Their house looked exactly the same. Same red brick, same porch swing, same bird feeder hanging from the oak tree out front. But as we stepped onto the porch, I felt like I was walking into a memory I no longer trusted. Nova clutched my hand, her other hand smoothing the front of her dress. She had asked to wear green, said it made her feel brave. My mother opened the door with a smile that looked rehearsed. "Gavin," she said, then her eyes flicked down. "And this must be Nova. You've grown so much." Nova smiled politely. "Nice to meet you." My father nodded at me. No hug, no warmth, just a nod as if we were colleagues and not kin. Inside the house was full. Marcus and Diana were already there with their families. Their children ran around with toy drones and light-up watches, laughter echoing through the hallway. Nova was the only child not greeted with a gift. Dinner was crowded and strange. They asked Marcus about his dealership, Diana about her private school job. No one asked Nova about her books. When she tried to speak, my mother interrupted with a story about Marcus's son scoring a goal in soccer. I tried to breathe, just get through the meal. After dessert, the kids played in the yard. Nova found a small wooden bird tucked under a bush and held it up, smiling. "I think I won," she said, but Marcus's son snatched it from her. "That's mine." Nova stood her ground. "I found it. That's the rule." My mother stormed over before I could get there. "Don't argue, young lady," she snapped. Nova looked confused, then spoke again softly, but I didn't take anything. That's when it happened. A sharp slap, right across Nova's cheek. "You ungrateful black girl," my mother hissed. "Who do you think you are?" The yard went still. My ears rang. I stepped between them and wrapped my arms around Nova. Her face was pale, her hand pressed to her cheek. I turned to my mother, voice low but shaking. "You don't get to touch her. You don't get to call her that. She didn't back down. She needs to learn respect." "No," I said. "You need to learn love." I looked around my father, silent, Marcus staring at his shoes, Diana pretending not to hear. "We're done," I said. "Come on, Nova. Let's go." She didn't say a word, just took my hand, and we walked out the front door without looking back. Nova didn't cry on the drive home. She just stared out the window, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the glass. I kept glancing at her, trying to read the silence. Her cheek was still red where my mother's hand had landed. It burned in my mind more than on her skin. At home, I made her favorite peanut butter toast with sliced bananas, even though she barely touched it. We sat in the kitchen under the soft hum of the fridge, the only sound between us. "I'm sorry," I finally said. She looked up, her voice calm. "You didn't do anything wrong, but I brought you there. I thought maybe they'd changed." Nova pushed her plate aside and folded her hands in her lap. "I don't need them," she said. "I have you, and I have Mom." My throat tightened. I reached across the table and held her hand small and steady in mine. "You shouldn't have to be this strong," I whispered. She shrugged. "Maybe I don't know any other way." I wanted to tell her I'd fix it all, that I'd make it right. But I couldn't. Some damage doesn't undo. Some people don't return. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I stood in the hallway outside her door and listened to her breathe. It was slow, even like the deep kind of sleep that only comes after heartbreak. I leaned against the wall, exhausted, and told myself I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt her again. Not even the people who once called themselves family. It was a week later when the doorbell rang. Nova was on the living room floor with a notebook, writing in that quiet, focused way of hers. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor, maybe a package. It was my parents. Gloria and Edgar Hartley standing stiffly on the porch, dressed like they were going to church. My mother wore a soft smile that didn't touch her eyes. My father clutched his hat in both hands, like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "Gavin," she said, "we were just in the neighborhood. Thought we'd check in." I didn't move. "After what happened, you're just stopping by." She glanced past me, looking for Nova. "We were upset. Things got out of hand. But we're family, and we'd like to reconnect, especially now with everything we've heard about Nova's writing." My father cleared his throat. "She's really something. That book of hers, it's everywhere. National news. There it was. Not guilt, not remorse, just interest." I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. "You're here because she's successful, because her name is on shelves and screens, not because you're sorry." My mother tried to protest, but I didn't let her. "You hit my daughter," I said quietly. "You humiliated her, and now you want to play grandparents." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You had years to call, years to show up. You don't get to show up now with fake smiles and talk of second chances. They stood frozen, unsure of what to say. I stepped back inside and shut the door behind me. Nova didn't ask who it was. I think she already knew. She just kept writing. She handed me the manuscript one evening after dinner. It was thicker than her last, the pages soft and worn from revision. On the cover, in her neat handwriting, was the title, "Fearless Children. I want you to be the first to read it," she said. I stayed up late that night, sitting at the kitchen table with a blanket over my shoulders and a cup of tea gone cold. Page after page, I read about kids who looked different, spoke different, came from places that didn't always feel like home. Each chapter was a story of quiet bravery, of standing up, speaking out, being seen. I saw pieces of Nova in every sentence. I saw the ache of being left out, The courage of holding her ground, the pain she never complained about, but carried like a backpack she'd outgrown and refused to drop. I saw Sienna, too, in the rhythm, in the clarity, in the refusal to let injustice pass as normal. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and wiped my eyes. She came into the room, notebook in hand, and asked, "Was it too much?" "No," I said. "It was everything." She sat across from me, resting her chin on her palm. "I wrote it for Mom, and for every kid who's still scared to speak. I want them to know they're not broken. They're not alone." I couldn't speak for a moment. I just reached across the table and held her hand. And for the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was sacred. I never had much to offer Nova. Not money, not connections, just a steady job, a roof that needed patching, and a heart that tried not to fall apart in front of her. I used to worry that it wouldn't be enough, that love by itself couldn't hold a life together. But watching her now, I know I was wrong. She turned pain into something sacred, took the silence people handed her and wrote stories that made the world listen. She never raised her voice, never asked to be admired. She just told the truth, and somehow the truth made room. I still work my shifts at the hospital, still pack her lunch in the mornings and fold her sweatshirts at night. But I see her now more clearly than ever. Not just as my daughter, not even just as Sienna's child, but as her own force, sharp, kind, unshaken. A few nights ago, I pulled out an old notebook Sienna kept during her pregnancy. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were scribbles about baby names, cravings, appointments, and on one torn page in Sienna's looping script were the words, "Shine, even when it hurts." I closed the journal, placed it back in the drawer, and looked across the room at Nova, curled on the couch, notebook in her lap, lips moving as she read something aloud to herself. I may not have passed down a legacy of wealth or tradition, but I helped raise a girl who knows how to shine through the darkness, and that I've come to believe is the only legacy that matters.